found that young adult was such a fantastic genre because it kind of envelops both the young and the old, right? There's a lot of readers who are actually younger than the 13 plus age group. And then there's also adults like me who still read like feverishly all of the young adult stories, right? So I felt like young adult was a perfect genre, especially because it deals with a lot of coming of age, right? And a lot of my books, a lot of my writing is always about self discovery. And I feel like that's kind of the pivotal time is when you're discovering it as you're, maturing and becoming that adult, making those heavier decisions, whether life and death, like everyone experiences, or whether it's something simple like trying to, combat how you've been raised, right? I mean, that's always hard. It's not combating necessarily, but it's learning to accept it and to challenge it in ways that make you grow as a person as well.
Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and I'm here today with author T.L. Coughlin. T.L., thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, welcome back. I know we talked during page chewing, but I wanted to pick your brain a little bit more. So I'm grateful and thankful that you accepted my invitation to come back.
Oh, I'm really excited to be here. Honestly, I had such a great time last time, so it's nice to have a one-on-one session with you. So
Oh,
thank you.
cool. Yeah, it's great to hear. And so I guess, well, first, you have an awesome green screen. We talked about that a minute ago. That's so cool.
Thank you.
I'm having green screen envy, but I guess we should start with because I was reading your bio, trying to get questions for you, and you're an expert at answering. So, what are you? So, I wanted to ask you, what are you?
So the "what are you" question is always something that's, like, loved and hated in the mixed race world. So it's always something that's fun to answer, but then when you kinda turn into, like, this game show with
Mm,
your friends, it kinda takes a little bit of a turn. But yeah, for me, so I'm basically a mixed race Canadian author, but my mix specifically, my mother's Chinese Taiwanese, and my dad is British, Italian, Irish, German, a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm a big, yeah, blend in that sense. So yeah, that's always my answer.
that's awesome, though. That's so great to have so many different. You know, your family is diverse, and it's great to have those different perspectives. And I wondered how does that experience shape your storytelling and the way that you tell stories and build your characters.
It experiences a lot because, especially living in Canada. I mean, Canada is a huge melting pot, and it's not that term's not used um, just haphazardly. It's quite meaningful actually because you really get a diverse experience when you're growing up, especially growing up with kids who come from different backgrounds and are able to share it. So when I'm writing novels, especially as a mixed race individual or multiracial individual, I always write multiracial characters because I find that the experience is quite unique. And since I was kind of the larger first generation of mixed race kids. Like I know that there were some before me, but now it's becoming a lot more common, right? Because genetics, life, everybody's
Yeah.
starting to merge and blend, and it's a really exciting time. But I want to write it for the kids that are soon to come, and can't quite find their place in society just yet because the world is still a little bit divided, understandably so, but for lack of a better term. But yeah, it's just trying to find that sense of belonging when you belong to two different worlds, right? And I feel like that's a very universal theme or lesson that's learned, not just from a multiracial perspective, but for all kids, especially if you're growing up in a different culture, or if you're growing up in a different employment than your parents did, or so on and so forth. Like just being of those two worlds and trying to find your either mix of it or choosing where exactly you best fit and where you feel more at home. So that's my intent whenever I really start to write. So all of my main characters are multiracial and have that challenge kind of set before them as they struggle with their identity, their purpose, their sense of belonging, and where exactly they want to fit in the world and how they can kind of make it their own. So
Well, that's so great to hear, and it's great that people like you are talking about these things and representing certain races and things. Because when I was younger, and I didn't realize this until I was older, but I didn't really have many people that looked like me that I knew from entertainment or from whatever. Not many people were the same. I could relate. I mean, it really occurred to me until later in life, and then I realized, yeah, that's kind of strange. So it's great that now it's more out in the open, and that's something we're more cognizant of, and trying to get that so people do feel like they're represented, and so they feel like they're a part of something.
Exactly, and I find, like, especially with, like we always say with us halfies, right? I'm part of the Facebook group Subtle Halfie Trait, right? So it's funny because no matter what kind of mix you are, you have, like, this automatic bond with people who are also mixed or also halfies or also, BIPOC. It's kind of the same way because our experiences are shared experiences, right? So I know exactly what you mean, like, a lot of times I loved and gravitated towards certain books, and I didn't realize it, but at the time, but like you said, growing up, I'm realizing it's because they didn't describe the main character as in depth as possible. So you were actually able to kind of envision your place
Mm.
as that character, which I thought was really fascinating to me. So I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that, like it was always, the blonde and blue eyed with crazy eyes and extreme powers and everything. And that was so fascinating and exciting, but like it's so hard to really find that perspective for yourself when you're trying to read it, right? But
Yeah,
the more ambiguous it is, the better it seems.
it's a good point. I didn't think of it that way. It's a great point. And I wanted to ask you about your book. So tell us about your latest book.
Yeah, so Of Us and Them is a YA science fantasy book. It was published by Darkstroke, which they specialize in dark fiction. It's a small publisher, and it got picked up fairly quickly, and it was quite the whirlwind of an experience. But it follows a 17-year-old girl named Everin, and she's one of 12 vessels for a species of aliens that are actually saviors to the world, and their interactions with society in our world history is actually hidden through global dragon mythology.
Hmm.
So the big begging question for me was, why are dragons found in so many different cultures across the globe? Like, how is that possible? Sure, we could say dinosaurs, but that's really, really boring. And I've always said that, like that was always my hook for myself as I was writing was, how do I answer this without going back to, oh, it's dinosaurs, oh, it's just bones, right? So they've interjected their powers and their authority, their leadership through dragons as these mythological beings, as these beings of wisdom and knowledge and challenge. Even in the Western society, it's always defeat the dragon and get the treasure at the end. Well, why are they always kind of posed as a challenge? And so I really investigate that throughout the book, and it follows her experience as she matures and gets to join the society that actually hid them in the world history. So as they're basically growing to the last influential moment where they get to come back to Earth and influence human society again and kind of bring them to a new apex of human evolution, you see Everin's journey through that. But of course, there's a little bit of a blip. Someone ends up getting murdered. So one of the vessels actually ends up getting murdered, which kind of creates this whole havoc chaos scenario because they're sitting there going, well, are the Leviathans, who are the dragon aliens, are they going to come? Are they going to bring human evolution to its apex form?
Hmm.
So high stakes. There's a little bit of murder mystery. There's science fiction and fantasy as well. So it's a nice blend just as much as me. So I absolutely loved writing it.
Did you, when you started writing, did you set out to write a young adult? Did you want it to be more accessible, or was that just something that happened along the way?
They always say to write what you know, right? And at a very young age, I always read up. I always read much further and more tuned to like the adult scenario and stuff. But I found that young adult was such a fantastic genre because it kind of envelops both the young and the old, right? There's a lot of readers who are actually younger than the 13 plus age group, and then there's also adults like me who still read like feverishly all of the young adult stories, right? So I felt like young adult was a perfect genre, especially because it deals with a lot of coming of age, right? And a lot of my books, a lot of my writing is always about self discovery. And I feel like that's kind of the pivotal time is when you're discovering it as you're, maturing and becoming that adult, making those heavier decisions, whether life and death, like everyone experiences, or whether it's something simple like trying to, combat how you've been raised, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's always hard. It's not combating necessarily, but it's learning to accept it and to challenge it in ways that make you grow as a person as well. So
Hmm.
definitely, I feel like it kind of reaches that big umbrella of aspects too. So
Hmm. And as you're writing, how do you take something fantastical like dragons and make and tell the story in a way that your readers can relate to that in their own lives of coming of age and taking those steps? How do you take something so that's magical and mystical and the science fiction? How do you relate that to you? How do you convey that to your reader?
I think there's like kind of two layers to this. The first layer was history. I've always loved world history. And, I wasn't the hugest history buff. Like, I'm awful with numbers. So if you tell me to tell you the date of some war, I absolutely won't know. But the stories, the people that were involved, the choices that were made, the myths, the legends that shaped cultures, and also the people in the society and how they chose and selected their way of life. I always identify that very, very deeply. So for me, that aspect of world history, in terms of taking all these dragons and these fantastical legends and myths of grandeur and kind of boiling it down to, okay, what does that mean for me as a human? Right? What does
Mm,
that mean for me as a person? And then that's kind of where I go into the second layer, which is, okay, for example, Everin, she's, taking in this massive story. And yes, it's so cool and it's fascinating and it's cool to, link that with the Leviathans and how they're evolving human evolution. But it's what she gets from it. So there's a lot of lessons as she's learning, and how each of these lessons from various cultures, from different places of the world, how it reflects on her as a person and how it evolves her decision making, and how she can kind of unite them all into becoming who she is as a person and kind of influencing all of those decisions as well. So it's
mm,
kind of a multi-layered aspect. I always love bringing dragons in into anything if I can. I feel like it's never dead. You can always have dragons involved, but it's more, I guess, the human aspect of that, and that's also kind of why I chose them as these grand alien beings, is because I wanted to remove our definition of what that dragon could be, right? So, especially because throughout different cultures and across the globe, the dragon image itself, whether it's a serpent or a winged serpent or a horse-like serpent or a deer-like serpent, or there's so many different mixes, and they do exist, and it's fascinating. But it's the base of it all, and making that something that's more relatable and something that can challenge the character and the reader at the same time, hopefully. So
mm. Were there any cultures or history that you went back and studied while you were writing just to get ideas or inspirations?
every single one. I went through, obviously, the big ones, like, Welsh society, and British history, Chinese lore, Korean lore, Japanese lore. I did Bhagavad Gita. I went through that as
Mm,
well. So a lot of that. What else? Oh, Native Aboriginals from Australia as well. I went through that. I honestly, there's just so many, and like indigenous cultures in the US and in Canada as well. There's a huge influence there too,
right.
right? So it's so exciting to, draw in as much as I can. And honestly, I got lost in a lot of the research because it was just like, oh wait, I'm on a whole different topic. How can I relate it? But I think what was really, really cool is that as the research kind of continued, there was so much that I could pull from it, that it was almost writing itself. Like, I wasn't the one creating those connections often. Like, even if I pulled a Welsh story from here and then an indigenous story from here, I was able to see the connections immediately. And that wasn't from my
Mm,
powers. That's from the legend of lore and how people talk about it, and again, that human condition aspect. So I don't know, it was really, really cool to see that. So I hope the young adult audience gets to get glimpses of that. And I know a lot of like the adults who read it too were really excited about it as well, because like they're either history buffs or they also love dragons as well. So
mm.
yeah.
And do you know how many books it's going to be a series, right? So do you know how many books you're going to take to put in the series, or do you have plans for that?
Right now it's outlined as a duology, but we shall see. I find a lot of the times the characters have their own voice, and it begs to develop into more. I'm hoping to keep it as a duology because I really like. I'm massive on images and image structure, and it's actually kind of fascinating that you chose the background that you did with the blues and the reds, because the first book is blues and purples and that cooling sensation, that comfort and knowledge of knowing who you are and where you are, and that's
Mm,
very much the beginning of the book. And it starts to kind of degrade into this feverish, purple color, where it's like, I don't know what's what anymore. You see everyone start to like question things. So my idea for the next book's cover would be to have it more red tones and everything like that, to show, somebody being fiery, basically. You know what I mean? Like taking on that dragon fire and developing into their own person and making the rash and harsh decisions that you kind of are forced to as an adult, and especially when you're dealing with something so high stakes. So I'm aiming for that because I really, really love images, and I did find another image that really inspired me. So I'm a very visual person as well, without beyond just the writing. So definitely duology, but the universe is so exciting, and it was really fascinating to hear a lot of the reviewers come back to me saying that they never experienced a world quite like this.
Hmm.
So I feel like even if it was a spin-off or a prequel or something, there's always room to explore. So yeah, we'll see how it
Yeah.
goes.
Let it tell its own story. And you mentioned about get your book getting picked up pretty quickly. What was that whole experience like? What was that experience when you did you query, or how did that all work out?
Yeah, so PL Stewart was actually the one that really introduced me to the literary world, especially to the Twitter literary world, because especially in COVID, you know, you're it's very closed doors, so often you don't get that kind of connection with a lot of people. And when he published, I was like, okay, this is fascinating. This is real. This is something that's, you know, tangible, and it's actually like a dream that can happen. So I asked him about it, and he goes, "Oh, there's so many different routes. Like, let me talk to you for a week because, you
Yeah.
know, the different ways that people publish nowadays has completely evolved." And so I went on Twitter, I started connecting, and I started researching, well, a lot of research. So I guess the last 3 years have been basically dedicated to constant research. But then I chose querying initially because I really wanted to see first, like it where I was in terms of my skill set. I've always loved writing. I've always been a writer. Even when I didn't know it, you know, my little sister would tell me, she's like, "You used to keep me up at night reading bedtime stories that you made up. Do you realize that?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't
Mhm.
remember that," you know, and I had no idea I had such a huge connection to it. So with the querying, I really wanted to see, you know, how far I could go and to challenge myself to something so intimidating, right? It's a very emotionally taxing experience, which I quickly learned. But it was really great to just understand queries and how to write the letters in a succinct way, how to write a synopsis. Honestly, just doing those exercises made my writing better in that sense as well. So I queried for a bit. The biggest thing was that a lot of the agents came back and said, "This is a really cool concept. When it comes out, I'll buy it, but it's not the right fit for me." And that's always what you say, not the right fit, not the right fit. And that was a little bit hard as a multiracial writer because again, I'm always used to hearing that you don't fit. You're too Asian for the white crowd. You're too white for the Asian crowd. You know what I mean? So I'm like, gosh darn it, here it goes again. You know, I'm kind of stuck in the middle. And I slowly realized that it was a little bit too niche of a topic
Mm.
of the genre blending with science fiction, fantasy, historical fantasy, and then also adding in the murder mystery aspect. So there's a lot of people who were saying, you know, you have great writing. This is really interesting, but it's not quite marketable.
Mm.
And so I was actually very, very close to shelving. I was close to saying, you know what, I tried it with this book. I love this book. I'll keep it on the side, and then I'll write something else that's a little bit more commercial. And yeah, right. I think it was the week of, and I was talking to my friends about it. I said, okay, you know what? Like, I've sent all my queries, I've sent it out to small publishers. Like, I haven't really heard much, but I think I'm going to just take a break from it. And that was the week that I received an email from Darkstroke, and they said, "Hey, can you send us your full manuscript?" And I was like, "Of course I can." You know what I mean? I did some research and more research. I mean, I already looked into them initially, but yeah, it seemed very much in line. So I was excited, but trying not to get my hopes up because, you know, requests are requests. You never know where it can lead. And within like a week, they got back to me and they said, "Yep, we want it. We're going to sign you." So within that month, I was signed. We discussed it. And what was very unique about this experience was that it's a small publisher, and they really understand the need for collaboration at that level, especially because they're not quite the big five traditional publishers, right? So the fact that what really sold me was the fact that you could really collaborate and coordinate the cover
Mm.
and the writing, and you can really like make sure that the vision for the book is something that you're proud of, not just what the publisher is proud of. And that's not to say that that doesn't happen in the traditional, you know, publisher. Obviously, that would be fantastic as well. But the fact that this was happening and it was such a great fit, especially with the dark fiction aspect and, you know, all of that, it sounded like right up my alley. And obviously, when you get an offer, you get so excited. But to realize that it could actually happen and that it could go into print and it would be published was fantastic. So, with the small publisher, they cover the fees, and I do my own marketing. So it's a little bit of a half and half. Some call it hybrid, but hybrid definition has changed so much as well. So I don't really know if it fits that definition either. But either way, it worked for me and I got my book out. So it was really quick at that tail end. It was a long querying journey, but it was really quick at the tail end. So and it went straight to publishing. And because it's a small publisher too, they were able to create it and print it and publish it very, very quickly. Right. As well, because they kind of dedicate their resources to a few stories at a time. So yeah, I think it was a really great starting point.
What was that like when it was done and you had everything signed and it was done and being published? What was that feeling like to say that I did this and you can hold the book in your hands?
It took me so long to get to that point because I feel like I was constantly in a race. Like you're always like, okay, the release date. Okay, are people gonna like it? Okay, ARC team. Okay, when are the reviews coming up? Like that, the reviews are the most horrifying experience. So you almost feel like when you get it, you're looking at it from like a much more critical standpoint because you're going, okay, is the title right or whatever because you get that author copy first, right? And they
Yeah.
said anything you want to fix, let us know. So instead of like breathing it in and enjoying it, it was just like, "Oh, this is happening. I must get it done." So it was actually weeks later when it finally hit me, and I'm gonna get all mushy here, but I totally cried. You know what I mean? Like I held my book, and I'm a huge, huge physical book person. Like I absolutely love physical books because I love the smell of the ink and the paper, and it's just a whole experience, right? So the fact that I got to do that, and I sat there, and my husband looked at me and he goes, "Those are your words." Like he had to like just push me into it and go, "That's yours. Like that you created that." And I'm like, I did. And it's a whole breaking point. So I think that's when like the pride suddenly kind of filled in and I gave myself room to breathe and enjoy the moment for what it
Wow.
was. And I had fantastic support system in my writing support group. They're the spaghetti throwers and they were immediately right there with me and just completely rah 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 when the moments where I'm like, oh, I'm too busy to get excited about this. So it took a bit, but I got there and it was absolutely overwhelming just to be able to realize that I could put this next to the books that I've been reading all my life. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that must be a great feeling. And one of the other authors I've spoken with is Richard Nell. He said it's kind of like telling a joke and then waiting a year waiting a year for a laugh. Like you tell a joke and
That's
it
exactly
just takes forever to because you have to wait for people to get it and read it and then you get your feedback. So that must be torture to wait to find out what people think.
absolutely. And I'm a very impatient person. So I'm always like, tell me, I want to know what you think about it. And then I'm like, wait a second, don't tell me. I don't want to know. Just leave me in blissful ignorance. But yeah, it was quite wild. And I think the part where it really, really hit me was when my local chapters put it in. And this is the chapters that I grew up at. Like, this is the one where I
Oh,
went on like the first dates. I hung out with my friends for coffee or coffee at the time, frappuccinos. We drink a lot of frappuccinos. But when she put my book into the young adult section next to like Suzanne Collins and stuff, I'm like, whoa, this is so cool. And that was another kind of whole layer of experience as well to it. So
wow. That must be amazing. And
yeah.
you live in Canada, and I wonder how different the experience was for you living in Canada. Was that different than it would be if you're in the States or another country?
I find that especially recently, because everything's online, like you don't mail your books, your manuscripts in to be reviewed by agents anymore. Query tracker, query manager, talking to my publisher. My publisher is actually in France.
Hmm.
That whole experience was very much online. So I didn't really have too much of a difference of experience there because I guess I really didn't have much to compare it to. But when it comes to the book selling part, it definitely is different because I think I am the only person in my social circle within like where I am now, which is Ottawa, who's ever published something or even looked into publishing something or even looked to writing a book. And it's not that those people don't exist, it's that we have no way to connect each other. And especially because Canada's just so freaking big, it gets a little bit difficult. So I was very lucky to have PL Stewart, even though he's in a different city. We know each other in our personal lives. And that's where, having that connection, even though it was online at that sense, having that connection with Canadian authors was really great. I do find that Canadian authors tend to band together and support each other because, you never know if somebody's not going to want to read your book because it's set in the Canadian Rocky Mountains like mine is. There's a lot of Canadian references, the poutine, like it's it's a whole experience, Canadian experience, but I want that to reach a massive audience too. Especially because a lot of books nowadays are all, usually located in the United States. So
Mhm.
there's always that hesitance of, okay, am I being too Canadian right now? Um,
Hmm.
in terms of selling that, because you always hear horror stories from both sides of both ends of the spectrum. But yeah, I mean, again, I don't have too much to compare it to. I know that there's not a lot of Canadian agencies. I know there's not a lot of Canadian publishers specifically who are also independent small publishers. The vast majority of them are all United States or international as well. So it was hard to kind of reach locally, I guess, in that sense from
Hmm.
there and to make those connections. But again, everything's kind of online now. So it's kind of blurring the lines ever so slowly.
Of all people to have in your corner, I think PL Stewart is the one to have. His positivity and he's so infectious, and so he's such a great person. I mean, it's just one of those people you meet and you just want to like be his shadow all the
Love and
time.
cherish
Yeah,
forever.
yeah,
You want to put him on a pedestal and just he's absolutely brilliant. I was very, very fortunate and I had no idea that he had such an insane following. So when he's like, come to Twitterland and he shows like he boasts like what is he at now? Like 24K followers.
yeah.
I was like with my little zero, I was like, okay, sure. That sounds so intimidating, but he really, really just he just loves to love and support people and to be champions for other people. And like that's kind of what's like you said, it's infectious. Like that's all I've wanted to do as well is to make those connections and now help out other people as well. So yeah, he's definitely a powerhouse of positivity.
Yeah, he is. You can't help but just be inspired when you're around him. He's just one of
And
those
he's
people
so
that
talented. Like, come
yeah,
on. You can't have it all.
yeah. He just radiates positivity and good vibes. So he's a great
Exactly.
person. I'm thankful to have met him. But I did read in your bio that you would stay up late when you were a child. I think you mentioned it, and do a lot of reading instead of sleeping. Which books that you read during that time inspired you or stuck with you through the years, and got you more into the idea of writing or to creating your own stories?
So at the time, like I started reading when I was super, super young, and like I said, I read kind of above my age group often. But when I was reading as a child, it was a lot of the Magic Tree House series and what was Lemony Snicket, Narnia, like all of that. I devoured it constantly. Like I absolutely loved it. I just love the adventure aspect. I think, especially back then, it was always very episodic. I found for a lot of books back then where it was just one adventure. And even though it was connected in a series, it was a standalone in some way. But what really got into extremely voracious reading was the Zank series by Piers Anthony.
Hmm.
Has not aged well. I know there's a lot of sexist undertones and there's a lot, it hasn't aged well. However, again, the adventure aspect was fascinating to me and it was so cool to read. So at 11 years old, I was reading these massive fantasy books and I think he has like 42 now or something. So he was extremely prolific. So he just kept writing, writing, and I kept buying, and reading. And yeah, I would actually get in trouble for reading so much because I wouldn't sleep at all. Because once I'm in a book, like I have to finish it that night. Otherwise, you know, it was just like, no, I'd be a mess. I'd just be thinking about it during school and daydreaming and stuff. So a lot of that really inspired me. Dragon Riders of Pern and Earthsea and all those classics. And my dad was a huge fantasy buff, so he had this massive collection downstairs in the basement, and it was just like bookshelves upon bookshelves. So yeah, it was hard not to become a reader in that house. So it was really really great. And from there, I kind of realized, if why can't I? Why can't I try? And again, I kind of needed that catalyst of PL Stewart and making it real for me because I knew him personally and it was a friend, and I was like, "Okay, somebody in Canada, a friend, is able to do this and publish their book. Like, how did that happen?" You know? So I've always started a couple books here and there, but I think that really gave me the push to just really dedicate myself to it and stick with it. So
Hmm,
yeah.
nice. And when you write, do you have like a daily goal, or do you set time aside during your day to devote to writing, or do you have a process for that?
I usually write on weekends. That's usually my dedicated time just because it's a lot easier that way. I still have my lovely 9 to 5 job, which I love as well. But it's always hard to make that balance, right? I do find that I write in stints. Like if I'm feeling it, then I sit down and I'll write like 20K words, and then I won't write for a week. You know what I mean? Like it's bizarre. I'll stay up and not eat, not drink, and I'll just be up, and then like my husband's like, it's like 7 in the morning, right? I'm like, not an issue. Let me finish this chapter first. So I found it actually kind of mirrored my reading experience as a kid, right? But I think it's because like I often again I'm very visual, so I play what's happening in my head. So it's very much like a TV series or an episode of or a movie, for example, playing in my head. So when I get into it and I kind of blank out everything else, it's very hard not to. Now with a much more regimented schedule and a new puppy, it gets a little bit
Mhm.
harder. So I've been giving myself a couple of goals as well to kind of just make sure that I'm keeping on track and I'm keeping the creative juices flowing.
Mm.
So yeah.
It's tough finding time, and 20K words, that's a lot of writing.
It only happened once. I don't think it'll ever happen again, but it was really intense. Yeah, yeah. And there's lots of edits afterwards because I think half the sentences weren't actual sentences.
And, so with I also read that you have a multimedia approach, so you're not only an author and writer, you're an artist as well. Um, how did you get into artwork? How did that all start for you?
That was also extremely self-taught. My father was also self-taught. He was much of a writer, so I'm kind of a papa's girl in that sense. I kind of followed him a little bit with that, and they would always buy me art supplies, for my birthday because they knew that I loved it. And it would always start with me, drawing characters or drawing just anything that came up to mind. But it was when I was actually playing StarCraft that I got super into like replicating the design and seeing all of that. Again, I didn't have any like doctored skill set, so I'm sure that they weren't that good at the time, but it was really exciting just to kind of put that into practice. And often, like I find that I always needed a brain break as a child, and that was one way to kind of focus my skill set into something where I can kind of forget about everything else and just enjoy, the time. It was very much like an inside, hobby, but I absolutely loved it. And so, yeah, I just started sketching, always pencil. And
Mm.
then within the last 3 years, I bought an iPad, and it was the worst and best thing that's ever happened to me because once you get an iPad and you get, Procreate, like, the world's your oyster. Like, there's so much to do that you're capable of. So, like, all of my marketing, my banners, my like, anything that's for marketing with of us and them, I created myself. So I do a lot of that. I do dog portraits for a lot of my coworkers. They
Oh,
commission
wow.
to do the, digital puppy frame. So basically, I go over it and make it into kind of like a painted kind of
Mm,
theme for it. So they've been really enjoying that. So I'm going to be doing that a little bit too. But yeah, honestly, kind of it's slowly grown, but again, like it hasn't gone into any, professional aspect, or I haven't really done much. But I was able to design my cover, my first cover, and have my publisher basically make it nice and clean and as per, a cover should be. But yeah, I found this image and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And then designed my own aspect of it too. So yeah, it's kind of interesting how helpful it became, especially when doing your own marketing. So,
yeah, and I think, sometimes it seems like writing the book is just the first step, because then once you write it, if you do your own marketing, it's a whole nother skill set, so that must have
yeah.
come in really handy for you. What has been the biggest surprise during the time that you've been marketing your book?
I think the biggest surprise is how consistent it has to be in order to be effective. And Like, I think, well, coupled with that is the amount of social media sites that there are and programs that there are and apps that there are that you could explore and tap into, especially for a YA audience, right? So I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on TikTok, I'm on like Twitter, obviously, as well, and my website. And it's just like it's so intensive, and you almost have to kind of choose two to dedicate yourself to and kind of become more of an expert in. So I know Facebook kind of went to the wayside just because I realized that my YA audience was not on Facebook anymore.
Mm,
You know, it's kind of evolved in that sense to become more for adults and for, people with families and such. So, and in that way, a lot of my peers were more willing to do the marketing for me, and repost and stuff as well. So I've kind of dedicated my time mainly to Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. But
mm,
again, TikTok, the algorithms, even on Twitter, all the algorithms focus on consistency. So, like,
mm,
you should be posting a certain amount every day or week or so on and so forth. And it's so intensive and it's so much work that I didn't realize how taxing it could be, because I love dedicating myself to that. Like, I will grind and I will totally do that to the nth degree. But then I realized that there's so many parts of me that I was also sacrificing in order to do that.
yeah.
So it's really, really finding the balance, knowing, where to put your efforts and how much to put your effort in terms of that for marketing. But, yeah, that was definitely the biggest surprise was you gotta post that many times in order to be seen, let alone, to get engagement, and you're just like, "Oh, goodness. Okay, sounds good."
And the algorithms are so strange because especially on Twitter, I'll sometimes I see more posts from people I don't follow than people I do follow. So it's really strange the way it all works and the things you have to do to be seen. And it's overwhelming for me just to help, spread the word for the channel or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of platforms and I can't do the TikTok thing. I don't know how you do it.
It's
Do you have any?
hard. You have to They always say, like, the most popular ones are, like, to put your face in it, and I'm like, "Oh, but I don't wanna film myself every day. That's so exhausting." So I realized that, like, one trick of the trade was, when you're all gussied up and you feel ready to actually be in front of the camera, basically record a bunch of them and then keep them in your archive. So then you
Mm,
can post them, like, 3 times a day or whatever like that down the road, and I was like, "Oh, well, I wish I knew that from the beginning," because a lot of the times it kind of is it makes you not want to engage because it's just so much work. You're like, "I have to do this every day? What do you mean?" Right? So, yeah, it's whole different beast for each one, and they're all
yeah,
so unique too, so
yeah,
mhm.
whole different strategy. And since the first book is out and it's been published, how has that changed your approach for the second book? Have you come up with a different mindset after that whole experience?
For the sequel specifically, it's actually it's been quite difficult.
Mm,
I was very, very much into it. I was actually very close to finishing my book and then immediately writing the sequel because I
mm,
knew I was in that world. I knew I was excited about it. I knew where it was going to go at the time. Now it's completely switched. Now I have a whole different ending, which I'm actually also grateful for. But I really do wish that I continued, because it's always hard to pick up on a voice that you created when you've
mm,
spent so long away from it. And so I wrote a YA fantasy in the meantime, and I'm currently querying that one. And that's in third person, totally different personality, totally different person, leading the force. She's a jester that's mixed race as well. So she's half Fae. So going from that mindset to back to my original series, I was like, oh, shoot, I probably should have continued it right from the get-go. But really, like, for me, I'm big on outlining and kind of organizing my thoughts and then pantsing my way after that. So I've realized what works for me as a writer and what makes me more engaged with the topic. And once again, the biggest thing was research. So once I got back into the research for the second one, even though I've already researched it, just rereading the lore and rereading the legends got me inspired again, and trying to find inspiration wherever you can. Because I find that the first book is always exciting because it's your first book. The ones
mm,
after that, it's not that it tends to become work or a chore. It becomes something that has more meaning and more significance and more weight to it because you know that people are expecting it.
yeah,
So I know that there's a lot of people that enjoy the first book. They're excited to see where it goes. And I'm like, Me too, because I don't know if my character's gonna change her mind halfway through, and lead me in a different direction, right? So, I know I'm not the only one. I know that sentiment's been shared on Twitter quite often, and it's always that, expectations kind of it's so easy to lose sight of what you wanted and where you wanna go with that story when there's expectations seeping in, right? So it's kind of rehoning your skills, focusing your mindset and getting inspired again, as to why you wrote it in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think next time I'd probably write them back to back, or at least, have most of it done so I get the voice again, right? Like, I wish I wrote the first chapter back then, even if it was just the first chapter, just so that I had that continued momentum and continued train of thought that I could develop afterwards. So, yeah, it's a learning experience still. So we'll
Yeah,
see.
definitely. I think it'd be tough for me, in that position to not let what the feedback alter what I had planned for the story. Was that something that happens for you too? That to hearing reviews or people talking
Absolutely.
how do you manage that? How do you find that balance?
I It sounds bizarre, but you can't write for one person other than yourself, right? You have to like, your characters best, the world best, and there are some aspects that have actually really opened my mind that feedback has produced a different angle or a plot hole or something that I was like, "Oh, you know what? I would love to write an entire chapter dedicated to that," which would alter my outline. But I have absolutely no qualms about that. It's the ones, like you said, that change the story to adapt into something that it never was. And that's something that you always have to be very mindful for and just kind of remember and reflect on like what was your story to begin with? What was the intent? I always had the ending written out from the very, very beginning. I knew where Everyone's journey would lie, but the very, very end, in terms of like how it's written, that was always changing. Is how does she get there, or what happens after, or will she get there, or so, yeah, I mean, in the end, you're writing for yourself, you're writing for the people that will love it regardless. And
Mm.
even when I was reading, these massive series where I'm like, oh, I'll be so upset if this happens to this character by the end of it. Even when it happened, you weren't really that upset. You were just like, okay, I knew that was gonna go. You know what I mean? You hurt me in the heart, but I'll continue reading to see where it gets there, right? But again, not everyone's gonna love it, and the people who are gonna love it for the right reasons, so it's making sure that you're not too swayed, but at the same time, never, never deny feedback, because the feedback is always invaluable, because there's usually a lot of tidbits here and there that can just make you stronger as a writer, right? And considering aspects that you probably wouldn't have thought of by yourself, so you never know.
Yeah, it can be tough. And you mentioned your dad had a big library and he's a big fantasy buff. What was his reaction when your book was in your hands?
Also tears. Good tears. He was honestly in shock, to be quite honest, and not that I wasn't capable of doing, but that, it was real too, because he's never really known people who also published. It was a very the industry and that world was so far removed from what we do, and I think that's also lends to the fact that we're in Canada as well, right? The big publishing houses, so on, that they're not in all cities. It's not expansive yet. It's not really well known. It's always this unknown beast that's also super intimidating. So not many kind of venture into it. So when he got it, he was just so excited, and he told me to give him like a Coles Notes version before he read it, because he's like, I just want to know. I just want to know what's involved, right? And once I got into it and showed the influences of how I grew up, it was a lot of laughter and a lot of love and a lot of, whoa, that's dark, because we're a very like happy-go-lucky family.
That's you. For your supporters, who are your biggest supporters other than PL Stewart?
Well, the biggest one was or is currently is my writers group. So they're the Spaghetti Throwers, and we created that name because we wanted to. At the time, we were all queering, and it was always throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, see what happens, and see where it can go. And they were just such a like they're absolutely incredible, and they are so knowledgeable of the industry. They have varied experiences, and what was really awesome is that they're global. These are friends that I would never have gotten the chance to meet if I was anywhere else except for Twitter, right? And as much as a lot of people don't like the app for many, many reasons, it really unified and brought me closer to people who just had my best interest at heart and always wanted to support me. So they were massive, massive support. Definitely my husband and my family. My little sister, she's the one that was saying like, "You've always been a writer, you just never knew it." She the poor girl, she's been through so much in terms of me like throwing ideas at her and saying, okay, does this make sense as a reader? Would you think that that's a plot hole? What about this? Is this satisfying enough? She's kind of my sounding board for a lot of that. So that support was meant the world to me because she's very much in tune with how I think and quick to on the draw to kind of give me the info that I need to keep writing and to continue. But yeah, honestly, it's just been fantastic. The community that I live in right now has come together as well. They featured me in a magazine, which was really, really awesome, and it's focusing on the neighborhood specifically in our success stories or just our journeys in general as people in this community, and they're just so excited because they're like, oh, a published writer, like this is fascinating, like who knew that this could happen, right? And the fact that it was like put into my local chapters and that they've been so supportive as well, especially with COVID and like the lack of in-person signings and stuff, just knowing that I had that connection was fantastic. But the biggest one that was the biggest, I guess, catalyst for me as well, besides PL Stewart, was my teacher, my creative writing teacher back in grade 12. I took creative writing just for fun, because I was like, you know what, I want to do something just for me. Besides, trying to do the courses that'll get me into university and stuff. But I did it and I absolutely loved it. And she wrote in my yearbook, she's like, she said, you have what it takes. You have what it takes. You have the skill set. And to get that from a teacher, I was like, oh, okay, she's just being nice. Like that, maybe that's just it. She's just being nice. But those words kind of stayed with me as I was going on this journey and just saying, you have what it takes. It's okay. Because we all know that like the imposter syndrome is just
Right.
always a shadow behind you, and it's so hard to lose sight of it. So you kind of need that support from your friends, family, and writers groups, and from my teacher from grade 12, way back when, just with those 5 words kind of pushed me and egged me on to do what I wanted to do for so long. So
Wow.
yeah.
And when you're writing 20,000 words, do you listen to music when you write? Is it something, or do you prefer it to be quiet?
I absolutely do. I need some shape of shape, some noise, always playing because like I'm a person who also sleeps with like the fan going. I always need like white noise. But I can't listen to music with lyrics when I'm at like really pivotal sections of my writing. So I usually go to like the Lord of the Rings soundtrack or the Hobbit soundtrack just because it really gets you into that sweeping emotion that I always need. And like depending on where I am, like if it's a fight scene, I'll put on like a more intense, like the the Mines of Moria, you know what I mean, with the drums. I'll do it to evoke that same feeling, so I'm hitting those notes as well. But I had a bunch of lyric based songs that I would always play like in between, and those were the ones that actually kind of jogged my imagination and going, okay, where could I, like my brainstorming sessions would always
Mhm.
be with that kind of music. But yeah, I always have to have something in the background, even if it's at like point one volume. I need something just somewhere so I'm not alone with just my thoughts.
Have you ever thought about putting, like, I know some authors put like a Spotify playlist together just to kind of go along with the experience of the book. Have you thought about doing that?
Yeah, I actually have one for both of my works. So I have one on
Oh,
my
okay.
website for Of Us and Them, and I have one on my website for A Motley Fool, which is the YA fantasy that I'm working on, or not working on, currently querying. Those are all lyric based songs, and those are the ones that kind of inspired me and jogged my memory with the brainstorming sessions and everything. So I felt like that was really important to kind of share and to evoke the same words and meaning because it's fascinating to see like there's a song called Leviathan, which is the name of the dragon alien species, right? And I know like there's so many meanings to it already, and but just to have that reference there, it was so cool because it's like, I don't know, it's kind of like it sounds kind of silly, but it's kind of like having my own TV show of my book, already written. Obviously it wasn't written for me, but it fits what I want to share. So for me and my own little prideful self, I can pretend.
Yeah,
But
nothing wrong
yeah,
with
I always love sharing that. I mean, I always loved reading books that had those playlists too because it's just, I don't know, it kind of adds another dimension to it, I think. So
it. Yeah, it definitely does. It's something that I really enjoy. We read Big Gal by Night by Nicole Eisner, and we listened to the playlist as we're in it, added to it, kind of give you a whole nother layer of immersion. It's kind of neat.
yeah. Exactly, exactly. I love it.
So when you're not writing and not working, what do you like to do?
Art mostly, because like I said, it kinda gets me out of my head a little bit, walking my dogs. I have 2 lovely dogs, one that really, really had to be part of this this podcast session. Yeah, COVID's been a little bit hard. We actually moved to the city, right at the beginning of it,
Oh,
so we haven't had much of a chance to explore it because I used to live here as a kid, but it was different coming back and not being able to experience it as an adult quite yet. But we've been doing a lot of hiking, a lot of outdoor activities, so that's been really fun. Skating on the canal, and like that's always a great experience. But again, reading is mostly my pastime. So I read, and then I write, and then draw, and then sleep and Netflix. So yeah, just a pattern of that.
what are you watching on Netflix, or what are some series or something you've watched recently that you've really enjoyed?
Oh goodness. What have I been I don't think this is on Netflix, but we've been watching The Expanse,
Oh
and
yeah,
it was tough because we had to wait until we read it first, and then we could and then we could watch it, and then we were like, "Oh, should we do that or should we do it the reverse, way around?" So we've been watching The Expanse, and that's been really, really fun. Um but yeah, no, it's actually kind of bizarre. I watch a lot of murder mysteries and like crime docuseries and stuff like that on Netflix recently. But yeah, I mean, my tastes vary. I also have my Disney Plus, subscription. We're not promoting any of these, but at the same time, hi, if if you want to promote either of us. But yeah, with the Disney, like I love everything. I mean, they just came out with Turning Red, and that was just absolutely near and dear to my heart as a, Asian Canadian growing up. So with the 90s references, I mean, how much more could it be built for us? So yeah, no, I've been really engaged in that. My tastes vary, so as much as I guess the genre blending kind of shows in my writing as well. So yeah.
and what have you been reading lately that you really enjoyed?
Ooh, the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman was
Hmm,
fantastic. I just finished that, and it was such a cool angle. It's such a fascinating angle, and I love it when somebody takes something that we think we know, and then puts an entire spin on it, like with death and everything that. Beyond that, I've been doing a lot of ARC reading, so
hmm.
stay tuned for a lot of these these books coming soon. I just recently read P.L. Stewart's sequel, so I'm super excited about that. Goodness gracious, that man can write high fantasy to no end. Those battle scenes are just perfection. But yeah, yeah. So it's been a lot of, I guess, supporting other authors as well through that with my most recent reads. So
Yeah. I'm really surprised how supportive the writing community is, especially on Twitter, a place that most people think is a just a dumpster fire. But there's so many great supportive people there, so it's been
oh,
surprising.
absolutely. And then, like I said before, it's people that you would never connect with or never get the chance to connect with anywhere else. Like my best friends in Sweden. When would I ever get the chance to meet this specific person who's been such a massive influence in my life, right? But yeah, it's fascinating, and it's so exciting that everybody can reach out and be so more often than not warm and exciting and supportive and again, just champions while we find our champion in an agent, So yeah, definitely. I'm very appreciative of the community.
And I wondered, has there ever been a hobby or a thing that you were excited to try, but when you tried it, you did not enjoy it?
Ooh, I tried diamond painting.
Hmm.
Diamond painting. So it's like basically it's like a sticky surface and it's kind of like a paint by numbers, and then they have like little gems and you stick them meticulously one by one. Um I was so into it for, like, the first while. I tried so many different things, and now I can't. It's, like, too meticulous, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so if something's, like, a little bit off, I freak out, and you can't fix it because it sticks and it glues, and there's permanence to it. So, it scares me a little bit, especially since I've been so used to, like, Procreate and stuff where you can just double tap and your error disappears within moments, right? So, that's been a little bit tough.
Oh
I had to retire a piece. I had a really epic dragon one that I was working on, just to for of us and them, and then I couldn't finish it just because it was just too massive and too Too detail oriented, unfortunately, for my scattered brain.
Was that tough to give up on? Because the way that you've explained reading and writing sounds a lot like me when you start something, you wanna finish it, and it or kinda claws at you a little bit. So, was that hard to give up on the diamond painting?
It was a little bit hard because again, like you said, like I will always want to finish something. But at the same time, I knew that there was a lot of other passions that kind of took over and took precedence and were more important to me. So it was kind of prioritizing my time, realizing, where exactly I could put that effort in and that, you know, instead of doing that, I would do my commission work for the puppy portraits and stuff like that. And I knew that that had a little bit more meaning, not just to me, but for other people as well. So it was more, I guess it was easier to let go of because I think there's that external pressure of wanting to, do stuff for other people as well. Besides, holding up in my house with like a little lit massive painting that's sticky. It's such a bizarre hobby, but to each their own. But goodness gracious, you got to have a lot of patience for that, and as you've discovered, I do not have any of it.
Yeah, it sounds tedious. Yeah, it sounds kinda rough.
Yeah.
So I have a couple of questions for you. I'd like to finish out with a couple of fun questions, to finish up. But, I recently spoke to author Halo Scott, and we were discussing jelly beans, and Halo likes to get a handful of jelly beans and eats them all at once, and I like to grab the jelly beans one at a time and separate the flavors. So, I wanted to ask you, do you eat them all at once, or do you separate them into different
Well,
flavors?
as per my initial reaction, yeah, I can't do all of them at once. I am also a type of person who can't have my foods touching,
Mm,
like, at dinner time. So when I eat, like, jelly beans, I'm exactly like you. I have to separate them to colors, and then, at the end of a meal or at the end of, like, having those varied colored, and flavored, candies, you always I have this weird thought, and I don't know if I'm alone in this, but I always want a specific taste at the very end. Like, if I'm having my last jelly bean, there's a specific flavor that I'm like, "You know what? That's gotta be the last one." So, I wow, I feel like I'm such a weirdo when explaining this, but
I'm the
yeah, I
same
pretty
way.
much separate it. I try it, and then I'll eat like all the other ones, and then I'll go to that last one and go, "Yep, this is the pièce de résistance,"
Yeah.
So
Well, because it's the flavor it's a flavor that will linger with you, so you want that to be the flavor that you enjoy most, or you just want that, certain refreshing or whatever the feeling may be that you want to finish up the meal.
exactly. See, that's such an eloquent way of putting it.
Yeah,
Now I feel a little bit less weird, so thank you.
not weird at all, not at all. And the second one is, do you have any favorite family recipes?
Ooh, chili. We have a chili. It's quite funny because that's actually like neither of my cultures, like Italian on one side and Chinese on the other, and I choose chili. But I discovered that my mom she would use chocolate, like cocoa powder,
Hmm,
in the chili, and I was like, "That's weird." And she said it's because it has like an umami flavor to it, and obviously like umami is like a huge influence in like all Asian cooking. And my mom loves cooking a whole bunch of different Asian foods, whether Japanese, Korean, Thai, or Chinese, obviously. But yeah. So like ever since that's been like my go-to, and because it's also easy. Like I'm not the biggest chef in that sense, and we love Instapots, so you kind of throw it all in. But I always add it, and my husband and I have actually had multiple chili competitions, and I always win, even though he won't admit it. That the cocoa powder is totally worth it because it just adds a different dimension to it. So you got to try that for sure.
wow. Interesting, because
Yep.
chili is big here, and I'm in New Mexico, and chili is everywhere. I mean, if you're not eating chili on your burgers and your pizza, it's like there's something wrong with you. So chili
Right.
that's the first I've it sounds interesting, I may try that. So, how much cocoa powder do you put in, like, if you're in the Instant Pot and you're making a pot, how much do you put
I
in?
think I think it was like tablespoon or so. I again, I'm very meticulous, so I always go by a specific recipe, and unless I pull it up, I won't know too much. But yeah, it's just the smallest amount, which you wouldn't think would do much. But I guess it kind of evokes a little bit of like like a mole kind of
Hmm,
ambiance
yeah,
to it when you're eating it.
yeah.
That depth of flavor. So I'm like, okay, maybe that's also where it's inspired from. But yeah, she's always done that, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like no wonder I always liked my mom's chili over everybody else's was because it was that different.
Secret ingredient. Yeah, that's int I'll have to try that.
Exactly, yeah.
It sounds
Not so
really
secret
interesting.
anymore.
Yeah, well, we'll keep it to ourselves. We won't tell anyone else.
Yeah.
So the next one was, So if the zombie apocalypse happened today, what would be your weapon of choice?
Katana. You gotta go with that. I mean, it's so hard not to. Like, I know guns, but that runs out of ammo, and it's such a cool cool weapon. As long as I actually learned how to properly use it, that's the thing. Like, if I'm just hacking at it willy-nilly, that's no, I don't deserve a katana, But, I think that would be my weapon of choice because it's long enough to create that, distance, but at the same time, it's a really fierce weapon that, will it's I guess it has a lot of longevity in that sense, it'll last longer rather than, just an axe and you lose the axe. So,
Yeah, and I think guns would be trouble because if you run out of ammo and they're loud, so then you're gonna
oh,
draw
yeah.
attention to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Oh, the Walking Dead character. That's where I'm getting it from. What was her name?
Oh,
M
yeah. Michonne Michonne,
Michonne,
right?
Michonne. Yeah, yeah. Freaking love her. Oh my goodness. And she's just absolute badass there. So, yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, as long as I could fight like her, then I would deserve it.
Yeah, I guess in that kinda situation, you'd have to learn pretty quick. You would have a
Yes.
there'd be a steep learning curve. But yeah.
Yeah. And you get a lot of experience. So,
Yeah,
hopefully you
lots of
get you get to learn about it quick. Yeah, exactly.
Do you prefer fast or slow zombies in your movies or TV shows?
Oh.
What's more frightening for you?
Personally, for me, I'd want the slow zombie because, I have more of a chance, but
Yeah.
in media, I do love fast zombies. I think it's just so unique, but at the same time, it almost seems like it removes the definition of a zombie because traditionally in everyone's minds, it's always the slow zombies, right? So I know, like, what was it, World War Z that had the fast zombies and everybody, had a whole conniption on that. I loved the intrigue of it and the excitement of it, especially just because it's such an additional threat, and I find that there's a lot of, like, plot holes with The Walking Dead with those slow zombies. It's like, "Well, you could have just done this?" So I feel like in media, if it's fast, then you don't have as many excuses to hide behind, I guess, in terms of the creativity of the story, so
And speaking of Netflix, have you seen Black Summer on Netflix? It's a zombie,
No.
yeah.
No, I
I think there's
haven't.
2 seasons of it, yeah. So if you're into fast
Goodness.
zombies, yeah.
Heck yes. Okay, okay. Putting that on the list.
It
Well,
it
now
is
I have to push off my sequel now.
yeah, actually
Yeah,
that's maybe
I gotta watch 2 seasons.
yeah, I shouldn't have said anything. Something that I like to ask all of my guests because I try and improve the process of my questions and everything. If the roles were reversed and you were in my position, was there a question that you would have asked that I did not ask?
Ooh. Honestly, I think you hit the nail on the head with, every topic. I mean, you really it's awesome. I love your interviewing skills because it's like you touch not just on the book itself and the usual questions, which is like our authorial journey as we publish and stuff, but you also like dive deep into like who we are as people, and I feel like especially as like a viewer, it's always so fascinating to get to learn who created your stories and from what mindset they were kind of writing it in. So honestly, I don't think you really I
Hmm,
think you hit everything, so I wouldn't really add much to it.
cool. Thank you. Yeah, I try to get that just because there's been questions that people have said like, "Well, I would have asked this." I'm like, "I never thought of that." That's a great question. So I
That's
was
fair.
actually
Yeah, and I think it also just varies, person to person, like, how the interview goes, right, and what's revealed as it, comes about, but honestly, yeah, you hit everything.
yeah, usually I have like a page and a half or 2 pages of questions, and usually I can only get to like a quarter of them because we end up talking about other things or you'll say something that will talk about another topic. So it's interesting the way they're all different. They organically just go in different directions. So
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
so if anyone wants to connect with you or find out more about you, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at TL_Coughlin. You can also go to my website, which is www.tlcoughlin.com. And I mean, a lot of my bio is also on Amazon where you can get of us and them as well. But yeah, pretty much I regularly update my author website. So I think that's the best form. And Twitter, I'm always on Twitter. So
And I will be sure to put all those links in the description of YouTube or on the podcast so anyone can find you and and connect with you and tell you how much they enjoyed your book and go
Oh,
buy them or
awesome.
check it out.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much. I really appreciate. I know you have books to write and you have you have dogs to
Interrupting
help.
pup, yeah.
So I want to thank you for taking the time to come and chat with me, and I had a wonderful time. So thank you for everything.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Honestly, it's always a great experience, so I'm really excited that, I got the opportunity again to, speak with you on a one-to-one, so thank you.
Cool. Yeah. And PL Stewart's already been telling me we should get them back to come on back on pages more. So need that in your kid.
Oh, that's awesome, that's awesome. No, I had such a blast with you guys, so honestly, it's a really great forum that you've created, so thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm thankful. Thank you again for taking the time.
Yeah, of course.